The first thing I remember is the sound. Not the engine. Not the wind. Not even the gunfire. It was the sharp metallic rattle, the sound a P-47 Thunderbolt made when its 8.50 caliber machine guns tore open the morning sky. A sound every German pilot learned to fear. But on June 22, 1943, above the fields of Brittany, no one expected us to survive the fight that was coming. Even now, more than 80 years later, I still hear it. The sky was calm. Visibility maybe 7 miles. Altitude 18,000 feet. We were escorting B-17s returning from a bombing run over Rennes rail yards. Routine. Predictable. The kind of mission every German fighter wing believed they had mastered. But that morning, the Luftwaffe sent something different. FW-190A-5S. Fast. Agile. Deadly between 12,000 and 20,000 feet. Flown by pilots from Schlageter 26, Schlageter, veterans, men who had survived France, Britain, Dieppe. We were new. Many of us had never seen a dogfight outside of training. Some still smelled like the Oklahoma soil they'd left just a few months earlier. And yet, we were flying Thunderbolts. The first warning came from radio static. Not words. Not coordinates. Just a strange interruption, crackling through our headsets, like someone dragging barbed wire across a metal plate. Seconds later, our flight lead said quietly, "They're coming. 11 o'clock high." That was all. No shouting, no panic. Just the cold certainty of men who suddenly understood they might never touch the ground again. The bombers tightened formation. We swung left. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with silhouettes. 2030. Maybe more. At that moment, none of us knew the truth. The Germans had set a trap designed specifically for P-47's. They believed we were too heavy, too slow in climb, too inexperienced to fight FW-190's head-on. They were almost right. Because that day, the Luftwaffe didn't come to scare us. They came to kill us. Setting June 22, 1943 above Brittany. 56th Fighter Group. We were part of the 56th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force, the first American unit to fully master the P-47 Thunderbolt. The Germans called our aircraft the Raumverdranger, the space displacer. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't graceful. But it was a fortress with wings. 2000 horsepower, over 7,000 pounds empty weight, dive speed unmatched, structural tolerance absurdly high. The plane could take hits that would rip a Messerschmitt apart. But in a turning fight, against an experienced FW-190 pilot, we all knew the truth: we were dead. Still, headquarters believed in us. They said the Thunderbolt wasn't designed to dogfight in tight circles. It was built to dive, strike, and climb like a hammer falling from the sky. That was our edge. And we were about to discover whether it was enough. Escalation. The moment the trap sealed, the first attack came from above. JG-26 dropped on us at a perfect angle, 30 degrees. Sun behind them, speed advantage. I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing the impossible. A wall of FW-190s descending like iron hawks, sunlight flashing off their wings. No hesitation. No warning shot. Just pure, cold intent. Tracer rounds ripped through the formation. A Thunderbolt on our right wing exploded, not burning, not spinning, but shattered, as if ripped apart by invisible hands. We dove. We had no choice. The P-47 couldn't climb fast enough to meet them. I felt the aircraft vibrate so violently I thought the wings would tear off. The altimeter spun. The sky blurred. The engine screamed. Around 350 miles per hour, the Thunderbolt began to stabilize, exactly as our instructors had promised. But the Germans stayed glued to us. One of them. I later learned he was Oberfeldwebel Karl Steinmann, a rising ace. Locked onto my tail. I heard his cannons before I saw them. Deep, thudding bursts. Not like our machine guns. More like someone slamming a steel door again and again inside your skull. I pushed the stick forward. The P-47 surged into a vertical dive at IT was a maneuver only a handful of pilots in the world truly understood at that time. And it was the only thing that saved my life. Human experience. The sound of a heart trying to escape the body. People think fear is loud. It isn't. It's quiet. Too quiet. Inside the cockpit, 15,000 feet and dropping. I couldn't hear my own breathing. My gloves were soaked with sweat. My arms shook. My vision narrowed until I could only see the gun sight and the spinning horizon. You don't think about dying. You think about not messing up the next half second. Every half second was the difference between living and becoming a smear on a French field. I pulled out of the dive at nearly 480 miles per hour. A speed no FW-190 could match safely. The G-forces crushed my ribs. My eyes filled with tears from the pressure. The aircraft groaned like it was begging to break apart. But the Thunderbolt held. That was the first moment I realized what we were really flying. Not a fighter, a miracle. Technical breakthrough. The secret the Germans didn't know. The Luftwaffe believed the Thunderbolt couldn't fight them. But they didn't know about the aircraft's greatest weapon, compressibility resistance. The P-47's thick wings and the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine allowed it to survive dives that would kill any German plane. A Thunderbolt could drop from 20,000 feet to 8,000 feet in under 25 seconds. No European fighter at the time could follow without ripping itself apart. This wasn't a design accident. Engineers at Republic Aviation had overbuilt the plane, corrugated internal spars, reinforced wing joints, high-temperature cylinder fins, and an engine cooling system that could withstand extreme stress. Our survival depended on these details. But on June 22nd, we didn't know any of that. We only knew one thing. If we stayed in the dive long enough, we might live. If we pulled up too early, we'd die. And the Germans behind us would live to kill more bombers. So we dove deeper. The land spun closer. Fields turned into stripes. Church spires blinked beneath us. 0.8, 000 feet. 0.6, 000.5, 000. I could feel the P-47 start to shake again. The telltale shudder before structural limits. I pulled. The wings screamed. And then silence. When I looked back, the sky behind me was empty. No FW-190. No tracers. Just the cold realization. I was still alive. But the worst was yet to come. Because the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The silence after the dive didn't bring relief. It brought something worse. Guilt. Somewhere above Brittany, men I'd trained with, eaten with, joked with were still fighting for their lives, and I had left them behind in a desperate dive to survive. The altimeter steadied at 4,500 feet. I throttled back, leveling off above a patchwork of French farms. The Thunderbolt was shaking. A deep vibration through the pedals, the kind that told you the aircraft had been pushed to the edge of what metal could endure. Oil temperature. 96 degrees C. Manifold pressure. Bouncing erratically. I wiped sweat from my eyes and glanced upward. The sky was a battlefield written in smoke. Thin black trails spiraled downward. Explosions flashed in the distance, and above it all, the glint of silver and dark green wings weaving through each other in deadly, silent arcs. Then the radio crackled alive with a voice I recognized instantly. "Eagle Leader, where the hell are you? We're losing them up here." It was Lieutenant Robert Mac McAllister, one of the best sticks in the 56A. He sounded out of breath. The sign no pilot wanted to hear. I shoved the throttle forward until the cockpit vibrated. I was going back. Not because I was brave, but because the men up there deserved better than dying alone. Mystery. They changed tactics at 8,000 feet. The radio went dead again, replaced by a faint German transmission. A clipped, disciplined voice. Tren Sie. Dann von hinten kommen. Separate them. Then hit from behind. It didn't make sense. JG-26 had never coordinated attacks like this at low altitude. They usually relied on high-speed boom and zoom tactics. But today, something was different. They weren't just hunting us. They were studying us. When I broke through 10,000 feet, I finally saw why .4 FW-190s were orbiting in a loose box formation, waiting, not climbing, not diving, waiting. They had figured out the Thunderbolt's weakness. When a P-47 finished a high-speed dive, it took precious seconds, 3 to 5, before it could climb again. Seconds that meant life or death. They were hunting us in those seconds. 1 by 1. Setting 10:13 a.m. altitude 12,000 feet east of St. Brieuc. The sky above St. Brook was littered with burning metal. A B-17 limped south. One engine trailing smoke. A Thunderbolt spiraled down with a wing missing. Parachutes drifted silently, too slowly, toward the distant fields. I climbed back into the fight and immediately caught sight of Mac. He was alone. His P-47 had smoke pouring from the right side of the engine cowling. The paint on his wings was shredded. But he was still flying, still rolling and turning, refusing to give the Germans a clean shot. 3 FW-190s circled him like wolves. 1 attacked from above. 1 from the left. 1 from directly behind him, and no matter what he did, one of them always had a firing angle. I pushed the throttle to 52 inches of manifold pressure. The engine protested, coughing once before settling into a deep roar. The airspeed needle climbed past 290 mph. I wasn't going to make it in time. Unless I used the one advantage the P-47 had left. Escalation. The risk that could RIP the wings. OFF. The Thunderbolt couldn't outturn FW-190. It couldn't outclimb it. But it could dive faster and endure more punishment than almost anything in the sky. Engineers at Republic Aviation had overbuilt the internal spars to tolerate massive compressive loads. Metal thickness was doubled in some sections. The cockpit was encased in armor. A P-47 couldn't dance, but it could fall like a meteor. I pulled the stick back and climbed to 14,000 feet. Directly above the swirling fight around Mac, the Thunderbolt groaned. The wings flexed. The engine temperature climbed again. Then I pushed the nose down. The air screamed across the canopy. The controls stiffened. The altimeter spun like it was trying to escape the panel. 350 mph, 400 mph, 450 mph. The cockpit shook so violently my teeth rattled. I had only one shot. 1 passed. If I missed, I would overshoot by a mile. But if I hit, it might give Mac the opening he needed. Human experience. The price of friendship. Indiana, a sky of strangers. As I closed in on the fight, I could see Mac more clearly. His canopy was cracked. His tail was riddled with holes. His right flap hung loose, fluttering in the slipstream. But worse than the damage was the look I caught of him through the glass. That he wasn't the cocky Texan who used to sing in the mess hall. That he was exhausted, terrified, and holding on. By sheer force of will. 1 of the FW-190s lined up behind him. A burst of cannon fire. White flashes. Mac's tail kicked violently. I pressed the trigger. All 8 machine guns roared as one. The recoil shook the entire airframe. Shell casings streamed behind me in glittering arcs. My tracers stitched across the enemy fighter. For a moment, a single breath, nothing happened. Then the FW-190 inverted and dropped. Trailing smoke. Too steep. Too fast. He couldn't recover. He hit the field below like a hammer. But the other 2 turned on me immediately. And this time they had the altitude. Technical breakthrough. The weapon we didn't realize we had. Most people think the Thunderbolt's greatest advantage was its engine. Or its armor. Or its guns. But they're wrong. The real weapon was psychological. German pilots were trained to expect American fighters to break when pressed, to panic, to pull up too early, to lose energy, to expose their bellies. But the P-47 changed all that. Because when a Thunderbolt dove, it gained nearly 1,000 feet of advantage every 4 seconds. That meant it could regain control of a fight simply by using gravity as a weapon. And the Germans hated it. 1 of the surviving pilots from JG-26 later wrote, "The Thunderbolt fell like a stone, but it always rose again. That we could not break the will of the American pilots. This was new for us. I felt that psychological edge for the first time as the two FW-190s began to close in. They weren't attacking recklessly anymore. They were wary, circling, watching, testing me. Like predators unsure if their prey was wounded or suddenly dangerous. But they would soon learn the truth. I was both. Cliffhanger. The sky opens, and a new threat. Erevisi came around in a shallow turn, buying altitude inch by inch. Mac was below me, spiraling toward the coast. Smoke trailed from his engine. He was still alive, but fading. The two German fighters repositioned, gaining height. They were coordinated, disciplined, experienced, and then a shadow moved across the tops of their wings. I looked up. A new formation of aircraft was descending through the high clouds, dark silhouettes, wider wings. Different engines. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't bombers. It wasn't Thunderbolts. It was more FW-190s. At least 10, maybe 12. JG-26 had committed a second wave. They hadn't come to fight us. They had come to finish us, and we were outnumbered 9-1. The sky turned predatory, and the hunt was about to begin. But the worst is yet to come. The moment the second wave of FW-190s appeared, the sky changed temperature. I don't mean the air cooled, I mean the fight itself froze. Every pilot, American and German, felt it at the same time. A strange, silent hesitation, a shift in instinct, like deer sensing wolves in the brush. Because when 12 fresh fighters dropped from the high clouds in perfect formation, something became brutally clear. This wasn't a dogfight anymore. It was extermination. JG-26 knew exactly what they were doing. Their first wave had scattered us, forced us to dive, split formations, lose altitude, bleed energy. Now the second wave was descending with every advantage a fighter could dream of. Altitude, position, surprise, numbers, and we were running out of pilots. Mac was limping east with a dying engine. 2 of our squadron members were missing. One was falling in a long spiral toward the sea. I tightened my harness. The Thunderbolt creaked. The engine rattled. My hands trembled. But I stayed in the fight. Because retreat wasn't survival. Retreat was letting the Germans shoot our bombers out of the sky. Mystery. Why are they forming up? At first, the new formation of FW-190s didn't attack. They spread into a wide V-shape, sunlight glinting off their canopies, and held that shape as they descended. That wasn't normal. German fighter doctrine favored immediate aggression. Slashing attacks, quick passes, rapid vertical moves. But this was organized. Slow. Methodical. As if they were waiting for a signal. Through the static of the radio, I caught a fragment of German transmission. Abstand halten. Nicht einzeln angreifen. Maintain distance. Do not attack individually. Why? No one coordinated like that unless they had identified a flaw in the enemy, and they had. They were targeting Thunderbolt weakness #1. Altitude recovery. A P-47 struggled brutally when it had to climb from 8,000 to 15,000 feet. Its turbocharger lagged. Its weight drained energy. Its engine overheated quickly under sustained climb. And every single Thunderbolt in the sky that day was low at setting. 10:21 a.m. altitude 9,000 feet St. Brook by the sea glimmered far. Below like polished steel. White caps broke along the coast. Thin trails of smoke arced toward the water. Wrecks, fires, parachutes from 9,000 feet. I could see everything. Max damaged P-47 drifting toward the bay. 2 Thunderbolts trying to form up but separated by almost a mile. 3 B-17s limping home on 2 engines. And above them all, 16 to 20 German fighters tightening their formation. JG-26 wasn't chasing us. They were hurting us, pushing us lower, pulling us east, slowly pinning us. Between the coastline and the descending wall of enemy aircraft. It was chess, not combat. We were the trapped king. They were closing the board. Escalation. The strike from nowhere. A warning came from the right. A flicker of sunlight off a canopy. I banked hard. A burst of 20mm shells ripped past my tail, exploding into white puffs. One shell hit the left wingtip. The Thunderbolt lurched sideways. My head slammed against the canopy frame. Two more FW-190s dove on me from 3 o'clock high. Cannons. Flashing. I pushed the stick forward. Another dive. My third that day. But this time, it felt different. The airframe groaned like a wounded animal. The right wing vibrated violently. The control stick stiffened to the point where I needed both hands just to move it. Altitude fell fast. 9,008, 5008, 0007, 500, and still the Germans stayed on me. My instructor had once warned us. No matter how good the P-47 is in a dive, remember, even a miracle has limits. At 420 miles per hour, those limits were becoming real. The right aileron fluttered. The engine temperature spiked. The oxygen hose rattled against the cockpit floor. Then a shadow streaked past my canopy. 1 FW-190 had followed me into the dive. Something few German pilots ever attempted. He was closing. If he kept following me past 440 miles per hour, he'd either black out or die. But this one wasn't breaking off. He stayed locked on my tail. And through the high-speed blur, I saw something terrifying. He was smiling. Human. Experience. Breathing feels opitoneal. The cockpit smelled like hot metal and burning oil. Sweat dripped from my chin strap. My visor fogged. The edges of my vision pulsed black and white. Forces pulled the blood from my head. My hands tingled. My legs felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. Every second in the dive was a battle to stay conscious. Instinct screamed, "Pull up," but training whispered something colder. "If you pull up now, you die." Behind me, the German pilot fired another burst. Flashes. Black. Streaks. A metallic ping against my fuselage. My brain begged for oxygen. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to keep breathing. Slow. Controlled. Against the crushing pressure. 6,000 feet. 5, 500.5, 200. The altimeter spun like a roulette wheel. Somewhere above me, the second wave of FW-190s continued tightening their formation. Somewhere below me, the French countryside raced closer. And in that moment, in that sickening drop toward the earth, an unexpected thought hit me. I didn't want to die in silence. Not down here. Not in a field I didn't know. Not with no one to witness it. So I did the only thing that felt human. I shouted into the radio, hoping anyone would hear it. "Mac, I'm still with you." No answer. Only the scream of the wind. Technical breakthrough. The structure that saved the P-47 the Thunderbolt's internal frame was unlike any fighter before it. Most aircraft used light aluminum spars with thin reinforcement. But Republic engineers, men like Alexander Kartveli, didn't trust theory alone. They had lived through structural failures in earlier prototypes, so they built the P-47 like a battleship. Multiple box, sparse thick ribs, reinforced wing roots, armor plates around the cockpit. A massive engine mount capable of absorbing violent dives. The aircraft could sustain nearly 9G loads in short bursts. Something unheard of in 1943. The Germans didn't know that. What they did know was this. If a Thunderbolt pilot mistimed his pull-out by even 1 second, the wings would tear off at 480 miles per hour. That was my reality. The horizon filled the entire canopy. Fields, trees, roads. All rising fast. 5, 000.4, 500.4, 000 feet. I had to pull up. Now I grabbed the stick with both hands and hauled back. My vision blurred into a tunnel. The airframe howled. The wings flexed so hard the paint cracked that a high-pitched scream ripped through the cockpit. Metal under stress. The Thunderbolt barely responded. I pulled harder. The horizon tilted. The nose lifted. the engine coughed, and then, at 3,000 feet, the aircraft leveled. Barely did I gasp for AI, my chest felt like it had been crushed. Behind me, the German pilot wasn't smiling anymore, he was gone. He had either pulled out too late, or he never pulled out at all. But I didn't have time to look, because as I climbed back to 4,000 feet, a new shadow appeared above me, broad wings, twin tails, .4 engines. A B-17? No, it wasn't friendly. It wasn't American. It was something I never expected to see at that altitude, and it meant the fight was about to explode into something even worse, and the sky was about to turn into a killing ground. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. A massive silhouette above me, broad wings, twin tails, .4 engines. The outline looked familiar, too familiar, yet completely wrong for this altitude, this moment, this battle. Then the sunlight hit it. Not olive drab, not bare aluminum, but dark, almost black. It wasn't a B-17 at all. It was a Junkers Ju-290, a long-range German recon and maritime patrol aircraft. Few American pilots ever saw one. Even fewer survived the encounter. And this one wasn't. A lone .2 more shadowed it through the thin clouds. My breath froze. Why were these giants here? Ju-290s never entered low-altitude fighter battles. They stayed far above, guiding U-boats or coordinating long-range searches. But today, 3 of them were circling above Brittany at 10,000 feet, right above the swirling mess of Thunderbolts and FW-190s. And then I saw the truth. They were controlling the fight. Mystery. They're directing them. A German transmission cut through the static, clearer than before. Gruppe 1, Halt 10.
Gruppe 2 absteigen. Winkel 7.
Group 1, hold. Group 2, descend. Angle 7. That wasn't fighter chatter. It was command. Coordination. The Ju-290s weren't recon planes today. They were airborne control stations, early versions of the tactics the Germans would later use with radar-equipped Ju-88's. And JG-26 fighters were responding to them with frightening precision. How did they know our positions so perfectly? Then it hit me. The second wave hadn't been random. They descended exactly when my squadron dropped below 12,000 feet. Exactly when the Thunderbolt lost its altitude advantage. The Germans had been tracking the fight with wide-angle observation cameras from above. They weren't improvising. They were orchestrating its setting. 10:29 a.m. altitude, 4,200 feet near the Brittany's west. The Thunderbolt rattled as I leveled off below the Ju-290's. The coastline stretched beneath me. Gray sea, thin beaches, winding roads, broken hedgerows, French villages dotted the land like quiet ornaments beneath the roaring chaos above. Them, smoke rose from 3 crash sites. Parachutes drifted. A B-17 was losing altitude fast. 2 engines dead. The remaining 2 coughing black smoke, and somewhere ahead. Mac. I scanned for him desperately. Finally, I found him. A small silver shape wobbling toward the shoreline. Barely holding altitude, he was alive. But not for long. .2 FW-190s from the second wave were descending toward him with the cold determination of executioners that if they reached him, he wouldn't stand a chance. I shoved the throttle forward. The engine roared. The P-47 surged. But I was too far. Unless I used the trick we all feared learning. Escalation, the maneuver we never trained for in P-47 training. There was one maneuver pilots whispered about. Not taught formally. Not written in manuals, just passed privately from instructor to student. The high-risk snap climb. The idea was simple. You pulled up violently at high speed, trading excess velocity for altitude before the engine or turbocharger could lag. It allowed the Thunderbolt to jump upward 500 to 700 feet in seconds. But it came with 2 dangers. A stall at the top, instant loss of control. Oil starvation under G-load, catastrophic engine failure. No one used it unless they had no other choice. I had no other choice. Speed. 360 mph RPM. 2600. Manifold pressure. 50 inches and rising. I pulled back hard. The airframe shrieked like metal tearing. The nose pointed toward the sun. The horizon dropped away. The engine coughed once. A deep, sickening cough. Hold together. Just hold together. The altitude jumped. 4, 2004, 8005, 3005, 900 feet. The Thunderbolt shuddered. Stall warning vibrations began to crawl through the stick that I eased off just enough to keep lift. And then, I was level with the two FW-190s diving on Mach. Both of them. Both focused on their kill. Both unaware I was right behind them. Human experience. The cost of being too late. Me gloves were soaked with sweat. My throat burned from holding my breath. My shoulders ached from the strain of the climb. I squeezed the firing trigger. The Thunderbolt erupted. .8.50 caliber guns tore into the sky with a roar that rattled my ribs. The tracers arced forward, beautiful, deadly lines of fire. They missed. The Germans rolled right at the last second, slipping under my burst like shadows sliding under a door. I cursed out loud. Mac's plane flickered in the corner of my vision. Silver, wounded, shaking. The first FW-190 lined up behind him. I rolled left. He rolled right. I pulled into a climbing turn. He dove shallow. We were dancing around each other in a sickening, spiraling loop, both trying to get the advantage, neither willing to break. My engine temperature light flickered yellow. Oil pressure dipped. If the R-2800 failed now, I joined the wreckage burning across Brittany. But Mac didn't have that luxury. He was losing altitude so quickly I could see the waves beneath him. His voice cracked through the radio. Faint, barely there. Buddy, I think this is it. No, not yet. Not like this. I dove. Technical breakthrough. The machine that refused TODIE, the P-47 Thunderbolt, was famous for many things. Its guns, its size, its dive speed. But the one thing pilots didn't appreciate until it saved their life was this: the engine cooling system. The R-2800 Double Wasp had a unique cowl flap configuration and a baffled airflow design that allowed it to cool faster than any other high-power engine of the era. Even after brutal dives, even after high-G maneuvers, even with oil pressure dropping, if the pilot managed his prop pitch and throttle just right, the engine would recover. Barely. I eased the prop lever back, dropped manifold pressure for 3 seconds, let the airflow reduce cylinder temp by a few degrees. Then, full throttle, boost on, nose down. The Thunderbolt answered. Not gently, not gracefully, but with the stubborn force of a machine built to take punishment. I caught the first FW-190 lining up on Mac's tail. He fired. White flashes lit Mac's fuselage. Debris flew off. Mac's aircraft bucked hard. He was seconds from dying. I pressed the trigger again. This time the bursts hit. The tracers walked across the German fighter's right wing. He rolled violently, trying to escape. I kept firing short, controlled pushes. A spark. A flash. Then a bloom of fire. The FW-190 began to fall slowly, then rapidly, a spiraling ball of flame sinking toward the sea. But the second one was already behind me. I heard the cannon bursts before I saw. The tracers. Thud, thud, thud. A shell hit my left wing. Metal tore away. The Thunderbolt jerked. Another hit behind the cockpit. Sparks flew across the canopy like fireflies. I rolled, pulling every ounce of strength into the movement. But the German pilot stayed glued to me, inch by inch closing the distance. And then, above us both, the Ju-290s began descending. All three. Dropping lower. Their presence darkening the sky like incoming storms. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Why would bombers descend into a dogfight? Why were they moving into position over me? Why? And then I understood. They weren't bombers today. They were coordinating an aerial kill box. .6 FW-190's dove behind the lead Ju-290.4 more slipped beneath it to cut off our escape. They weren't hunting individuals anymore. They were trapping the last of us. A German voice cut through the radio. Alle Jäger, schließen. All fighters. Close in. The sky tightened around me like a fist. Mac's voice whispered through the static. Buddy, you need to run. But there was nowhere to run. Not anymore, because the kill box was closing, and I was in the dead center of it. The moment the Ju-290s dropped below 9,000 feet, the sky stopped feeling like it felt like walls. Invisible, narrowing walls. Every move I made, every climb, every bank, every dive, triggered a counter-move from the German fighters above me. They weren't chasing anymore. They were containing. I had seen this tactic once in a classified briefing, a Luftwaffe interception method originally designed for isolating lone mosquitoes. They called it the Luftkasten, the airbox. But I had never believed they would use it against Thunderbolts. Not until now. .12 FW-190s formed the corners of the invisible cage. .3 Ju-290s sealed the top, and the coastline behind me blocked any escape to the west. The only open direction left was east, deeper into German-controlled territory. Exactly where they wanted me to go. Mac's broken voice crackled through the radio. I can't make altitude. You're on your own, buddy. Get out. But he didn't understand. There was no out. Mystery. The sound no pilot wanted. To hear a strange clicking noise echoed through my headset. Not static. Not radio chatter. A rhythmic metallic click. 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 I recognized it instantly. Telemetry. The Ju-290s above me weren't just observing. They were actively range-finding, using long focus cameras and angle measurements to direct the 190s beneath them. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was mathematics. The clicking grew faster, sharper, and then a German voice cut through. Zielhoch wir 1000.
Jäger unten links feuerbereit.
Target altitude. 4,000. Fighter bottom left. Prepare to fire. My blood froze. They weren't speaking to me. They were speaking about me. Setting. 10:37 am. Altitude 4,000 feet. The edge of the bay. The land beneath me curved into the bay like a sharp blade. Green fields giving way to gray-blue water. Sunlight shimmered across the waves. Boats bobbed quietly near the distant docks, unaware of the aerial slaughter unfolding above them. I held altitude at 4,000 feet. Not because I wanted to, but because the kill box forced me into it. Below 3,000 feet, I would be torn apart instantly. JG-26 excelled in low-altitude strikes. Above 5,000 feet, I'd drift into the upper layer of the box, where the next set of FW-190s waited with altitude advantage. The Germans had created a perfect vertical trap. Mac was fading. I could hear it in every breath he forced through the radio. He wasn't my mission anymore. He was my fear. The future waiting for me if I made one mistake. Escalation. The first. Execution passes. The attack came from 5 o'clock low. The exact blind spot where the Thunderbolt's armored seat and thick rear fuselage created a vulnerability. I only saw the FW-190 because sunlight flashed off his prop spinner. I rolled left. Too late. He opened fire. The first burst hit the tail cone. Metal shrieked. A chunk of armor flew off. My aircraft jolted violently. The next burst hit the right wing root. The cockpit lit up with sparks. Shards of aluminum pinged against my visor. My oxygen hose was torn loose. Air hissed around my mask. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. My chest locked. Black spots clouded my vision. Instinct took over. I shoved the canopy open an inch. Wind screamed into the cockpit. Cold air slapped my face. My lungs filled with freezing, painful oxygen. I was alive again. The FW-190 overshot. Too fast, too shallow. But two more moved into position behind him. Like sharks circling blood. I dove. But they dove with me. I climbed. But they climbed with me. I rolled. But they rolled tighter. There was no escape. Not in maneuver. Not in speed. Not in altitude. I wasn't fighting pilots anymore. I was fighting geometry. Human experience. Fear becomes a living thing. People think fear is a shiver, that they're wrong. Fear is heat, a slow-burning heat that spreads through the chest and makes every breath sharp. Fear is the tremble in your fingers when you touch the throttle. Fear is the ache in your arms from gripping the stick too tight. Fear is the sound of your own heartbeat inside your headset. At 4,000 feet, surrounded by fighters, with the sea beneath me like a mirror waiting to break, that fear became something alive. A creature sitting behind my ribs, watching, whispering, "This is how you die. Not in fire, not in glory, but as a target." Hunted. I swallowed hard and forced my mind to stay sharp. You cannot panic in a Thunderbolt. If you do, you die before you even touch the ground. Technical breakthrough. The secret we never practiced. There was only one system on the P-47 that could save me now. Something almost no pilot talked about because almost no one ever needed it in escort missions. The intercooler doors. Hidden inside the fuselage, they fed cool air into the turbo supercharger. Opening them at high throttle normally meant losing speed, the last thing a pilot wanted. But in extreme dives, it created a vortex of cooling airflow that could drop cylinder temperature by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in seconds. And a cooler R2800 meant I could push the engine harder. Longer, deeper, without blowing. A cylinder head. The Germans didn't know about this trick. Most Americans didn't either. But I had heard a rumor, just a rumor, from an instructor. If you're going to hell in a dive, open the intercoolers. The devil hates cold engines. I reached for the lever. My hand shook. The FW-190s were closing in behind me, 600 feet, 500, 400 cannons flashed. The next burst would hit me. I yanked the lever open. The Thunderbolt's pitch changed instantly. The airflow over the fuselage howling like a living thing. I shoved the nose down. The P-47 dropped like a meteor. The airframe shook, then steadied. Speed climbed. 0.350 mph, 390.420. The Germans followed, but not as tightly as before. They weren't used to a Thunderbolt diving this deep, this fast, this late in a fight. I hit 460 mph. The coastline blurred beneath me. The sea turned into a glowing sheet of light. For a moment, just a moment, I had space. But the kill box shifted. The entire formation adjusted downward. JG-26 had anticipated this move. And that's when I realized this wasn't about killing me. This was about breaking me. Breaking my will. My strength. My resolve. And then finishing me. Cliffhanger. The last thing a pilot should ever see. As I pulled out of the dive at 2,800 feet, with every muscle in my body shaking, a dark shape appeared on the horizon. Not an aircraft. Not smoke. A tower. A radio beacon on the far edge of the Brittany coast. Tall, skeletal, unmistakably German. If I crossed that line, I would be flying over occupied territory. Fuel low. Altitude low. German fighters above me. Flak batteries ahead. Trapped between sky and ground. The kill box tightened. The FW-190s spread out, forming a final semicircle behind me. The Ju-290s dropped another 1,000 feet, sealing the top, and the radio crackled with a cold, calm German order. Alle Jäger, jetzt. All fighters. Now. Mac's voice whispered one last time. Buddy, don't die out there. But there was no voice strong enough to break what was coming. Because what was coming next wasn't a dogfight. It was an execution. And I had one move left. One impossible move. And if it failed, I wouldn't die in the clouds. I'd die on German soil. The German radio tower loomed ahead like a skeleton against the sea. A warning. A boundary. A promise. Cross it. And I would be flying into the jaws of occupied France. Flak batteries, ground observers, anti-air networks, and more fighters waiting to rise like hornets from their nests behind me. 12 FW-190s tightening the kill box above me. 3 Ju-290s descending, turning the sky into a ceiling of steel. Ahead of me, German territory. Below me, only waves. That was the battlefield. A shrinking world of death, geometry, and noise. Then the German commander gave the order, Alle Jäger, jetzt. All fighters. Now that it was the last command any pilot wanted to hear. Because it meant this wasn't a fight anymore. It was the final strike. Mystery. Why are they closing TO knife range? FW-190s were designed for high-speed slashing attacks. Hit, break, climb, repeat. But this time they didn't break. They closed. Closer. Closer still. I could see the edges of their wings vibrating. I could see their prop arc spinning. I could see the pilots' helmets and goggles inside the canopies. 20, maybe 30 yards behind me. Dangerously close. Too close for them. But not for what they were planning. Another German transmission crackled through the static. Achtet auf sein Flügel.
Wird wieder tauchen.
Watch his wings. He will dive again. They were waiting for me to make my move. They were studying me, just like the Ju-290s had been tracking every maneuver. Then came the line that chilled the blood in my veins. When talked, schneiden. If he dives. Cut. Cut. Not chase. Not shoot. Cut. They were planning to slice across my dive path, trapping me even as I dropped at a maneuver so dangerous it bordered on suicidal. But JG-26 had mastered it. They were turning my own escape tactic into a coffin, and the tower was getting closer, setting. 10:44 am altitude, 3,000 feet German coastal defense on the sea below darkened, deeper, colder water. The coastline angled sharply, flattening into occupied territory. TO the north. Flak emplacements. TO the east. A Luftwaffe airfield. Likely Saintbrook or Dinah. TO the south. Nothing but German patrol routes. The kill box tightened one last time. Like a steel jaw. Like a closing trap. I was shaking. My arms the consistency of wet rope. My legs burning from the strain of every maneuver. My lungs are a W. My mouth dry as sand. I was at the edge of human endurance. And my fuel gauge was near empty. 15 minutes of flight left. A T-best. 1 burst of flak could kill me. 1 burst of cannon could kill me. 1 mistake would kill me. But there was one place, the Germans did not expect me to go. Because no sane pilot would ever attempt it. Escalation. The maneuver that should have killed MEAs. The kill box compressed. I forced myself to breathe slowly, rhythmically, the way instructors drilled into us. Think. Don't react. Act. The Ju-290s were directly above. FW-190s were behind. Flak was ahead. There was only one direction left. Straight down. But they expected that, so I did something no Thunderbolt pilot wanted to do at 3,000 feet. I chopped throttle. The engine sputtered. The nose dipped slightly. My speed bled off. The German fighters overshot by instinct. Their formation spacing thrown into chaos for exactly 1 second. 1 I slammed the throttle forward to full power. The R-2800 screamed. The Thunderbolt leapt like an animal kicked awake. Then I rolled the aircraft inverted and dove, not toward the sea, but toward the coastline cliffs. A near vertical dive toward rock, water spray, and certain death if I misjudged by even a heartbeat. The Germans hesitated. They expected open water. Not cliffs. Not terrain. Not a dive ending in stone. But a Thunderbolt could hold together at impossible speeds, and I trusted its frame more than my own bones. The air over my canopy began to howl. The altimeter spun. 2,000 feet. 1, 800.1, 500. Cannons flashed behind me. FW-190s followed. But their nerves cracked before mine did. They pulled out early. I didn't. The cliff rose so fast it blurred into color: gray stone, green moss, white sea foam. 1, 200.900.600. My heart climbed into my throat. I waited. Waited too long. 500 feet. Now I hauled back with every ounce of strength left in my body. The P-47 groaned, screamed, bent, but it held. The cliff face passed so close beneath me I could see individual cracks. Spray from the sea hit the underside of my fuselage. The Thunderbolt leveled out, and I found myself flying inside a narrow strip between cliff and water. The Germans tore past above me, overshooting with too much altitude. They had lost visual. I was gone. Human experience. I don't want to die here. Not like this. My entire body was shaking uncontrollably, and my hands went numb, and my stomach cramped, and my jaw locked tight that I had pushed myself. My lungs, my muscles, my nerves. Beyond anything I thought a human being could endure. And for a moment, a terrifying thought broke through. I don't want to die here. Not in a ravine. Not on a coastline. Not alone. But the P-47 was built for men who refused to die on enemy terms. And I was still flying, barely. The radio hissed with static. Then, a faint voice, weak, breaking, Mac. Buddy, are you alive? I swallowed hard, forcing air past my shaking throat. Still here, Mac. Good, don't leave me. He was alive. That single fact kept my hands steady. But the danger wasn't over, because the Germans had regrouped, and they were coming back. Technical breakthrough. The tool in 01 expected TOWRK. The Thunderbolt had one tool left. One the Germans hated more than anything. The paddle blade propeller. Introduced to help P-47's climb and accelerate better. It allowed rapid recovery from low altitude dives. Most German pilots didn't understand how powerful it was. They thought the Thunderbolt needed a long run to regain speed. They were wrong. I pushed the prop lever fully forward. The paddle blades bit into the air. The aircraft surged, climbing just enough to skim over the water. I stayed low, hugging the coastline, using the cliffs as camouflage. German fighters streaked overhead, missing me again. They searched, scattered, turned, but they couldn't find me, because I wasn't in the sky anymore. I was in the terrain, and terrain was the enemy of air superiority. I followed the coast west, the direction the Luftwaffe least expected. The sea glinted beside me. The cliffs shielded me. The Thunderbolt clawed forward on sheer stubbornness. Finally. The coastline bent north. The air grew quieter. The Germans vanished, and then, as if a curtain lifted, the English Channel appeared in the distance. Home. The ND. What survival really meant to Mac never made it back to altitude. But he ditched safely. In the shallows, fishermen found him an hour later. They hid him from German patrols for 2 days until the resistance smuggled him to safety. I made it back to England on fumes. I landed with an engine so hot it smoked for 15 minutes after shutdown. Intelligence later revealed that JG-26 had used the Ju-290s experimentally, the first large-scale attempt at precision-controlled air trapping. They expected to wipe out our escort that day. They didn't. Because the Thunderbolt, heavy, clumsy, mocked, did something no one believed it could. It survived the impossible. Many Marines used to say Quonset huts saved their lives on the ground. On June 22, 1943. The P-47 Thunderbolt saved mine in the sky, and the German pilots who walked away that day learned something they never forgot. You can outturn a Thunderbolt. You can outclimb it, but you cannot break the will of the man flying it. That was the real victory. Not the kills, not the numbers, not the claims, but the simple, stubborn refusal to die on someone else's terms.